I'm not going to talk too much about data. I'm going to get a little bit of help on that later on in this speech. So I'm only going to speak for 7-8 minutes, but I am going to take you on a journey that you would not have been on before, I can assure you. And I also think what we've heard this morning, and now into emissions and decarbonization, it ties very much into AI, which we talked about today. I heard Christian was talking something about over-promising. I will do that. Collective standardization, we will talk about that. And enable the builder, I think Tore mentioned that, wherever you are. And then I also agree with input equals output. And then domain data. Somebody said it's wrong from the beginning. I'm also going to challenge that. So take a step back. I don't have a maritime background, but I can manage a sailboat, which can be challenging from time to time. And I know seafarers who can't even do that. So I consider myself a sailor. A couple of years back, I realized how bad our oceans were in, the condition of plastics, microplastics, and you've probably heard this before, and I'm not going to do a big debate on climate here, promise you. But I decided to do something about it, so I found some like-minded people. I got Paolo down here, and I got Rasmus, and I went to my boss at Stena and said, we need to do something with the use of plastic on board our ships. Let's start with that. And this is the result today, and it's a poor result, and you'll see why, because I'm also going to challenge the members' part. So if your company is not up here with the logo, you're going to be asking yourself why in 5 minutes. So we went after plastic water bottles on board ships, and in a minute I'll show you how many bottles we're talking about. But we took one line item on board the ship and looked at it. And plastics are polluting our oceans. But by eliminating plastic on board, there's zero revenue risk. So if there's any CFOs in here or financial managers, just pay attention. There's no operational downside either. And you can scale it to entire fleet. And you'll save money every single year for free. But now the data comes in, the AI comes in, the procurement comes in. And now I sat next to Hurtigruten IT guys. So a ship will procure over 20,000 line items a year, and you can probably triple, quadruple that, because it comes in different shapes and sizes, packs and brands. Now, a plastic water bottle equals that. It's just not a bottle. If it's a half liter, if it's a pint, if it's a liter, 1.5 liters, 5 liters, and I can keep going on. It's different sizes, but it's also different data sets that you have to consider. But it falls under scope 3, and the presentation we had before is scope 1, the big ticket. Rasmus is going to help me explain why scope 3 is important, because it is. It's more than you know. We replaced procurement with infrastructure. Simple. A ship would buy bottles to the crew on board they can drink throughout the year, and it's a lot of water. We found out you can put a filtration system on. You don't have to buy anything else to support the crew for good drinking water. This was so easy. So easy. But then one guy came to me and said, Michael, do you have the data? And I said, data? I don't need the data. I just saved a lot of waste. I just saved a lot of money. Why do I care? I said, but how can you make decisions without data? I said, because it makes sense. So then he said to me, okay, I'll make a calculation. That's the one you're looking at there. So if I tell you a ship will be buying about 18,000 liters of clean water for drinking a year. And if you look over here, when you consume the 357th bottle on board that ship, which would equal 150 liters, you equal the emissions of the machine. So from then on, you just add on emissions to your vessels. And it's a lot. It's a whole lot, because your ship could average be buying 29,200 bottles a year. It equals 0.5 tons of plastic waste and 4.4 tons of CO2. And you saw some numbers before from Danelek and Torketon talking about this. But we're also saving money in the process. And this is when procurement comes in, Paolo. great to take to your boss. I can save you $5,000 a year per ship. No wonder why we have Maersk on board with this, because they got a lot of ships, so they're saving a lot of money. But what happens at the IMPA Safe Fleet size, I said in the beginning, if your company is not part of this, I question why. I seriously do. Because it costs you nothing to do this. This is just an action initiative. I'm not going to spell all out. I think you can read quite easily. But this is what you save on one line item. We're talking scope 3. Now imagine the other 20,000 when you get those in order. So what do? I do this for free. I just think it's fun while I do my real work as well. We're not a sustainability tool, as I wrote in the bottom, but we are an enabler. We bring people together. We're talking about collaboration. We have a few of these companies over there. We're all collaborating. We're talking procurement platforms. We're talking to API enablers. We're talking to producers, MAN, Viking Lifesaving, Wilhelmsen, everybody. Try to find the entire ecosystem, how we can talk together, because the problem you're having in ship supply, as I refer to it, under scope 3 is every customer wants something different. So if I talk to Wilhelmsen, they want something special. If I talk to Scorpio, they want something special. If I want to talk to Maersk, they want something special. In reality, they're buying the same thing, but they want a different brand, they want a different size. Now imagine when you start asking them for emissions. Wilhelmsen want one data set, I want a data set. Torvald Klaveness want a third data set. You'll kill the suppliers and you will never get the information. So we are bringing people together and we're talking about it. And I'm going to go back to this slide and I'm going to let Rasmus take over to talk you through the rest, because he's much better than I am to explain what's coming next.
I hope so. I don't know. Thank you, Mikael.
There you go.
So, if we, of course.
Okay. This one.
Oh yeah.
Thank you. Sorry.
Oof.
All good.
So if we rewind back 3 years ago, Mikael was doing somewhat the same presentation, and I was sitting like you in the room. I was like being a little bit skeptical. Can it really be true? Mikael didn't bring the nice slides that you see behind you, simply because he didn't have it. So he felt it was the right thing to do, but didn't have the data. And I was the critical guy asking, so why don't you get the data? Or is it the right thing? So I helped Mikael, I helped IMPA Safe, building up some data around these initiatives. This is one of them you see here. Mikael also explained about another initiative that I'll present very shortly. So 3 years ago, this made sense. Today, it makes even more sense. And Mikael spoke briefly about something called Scope 3. And I think just so everybody's on the same page, let me just introduce what is Scope 3. So my name is Rasmus. I'm the CEO of Reflow. We are an environmental software and engineering firm, and we help ship owners and OEMs figuring this out. Now, if we go 4 years back, Maersk were building a brand new series of vessels called the Equinox class. Back then it was just a design. And us and Maersk got together because Maersk was suddenly interested in figuring out how much of their emissions comes from the vessel itself. Now, why would they be interested in that? Well, it was simply because that they had figured out, like we have, that once you start adding green fuel to the vessel, the emissions from the fuel will go down, but the emissions for the rest of the vessel, and here I'm talking the life cycle emissions, if some of you have heard of that before, the emissions involved with building the ship, choosing the steel, the energy that goes into the welding or the gases, the maintenance of the vessel, the food that is consumed on board, the personal protection equipment, the yard stays, everything is all the other emissions, and those are the ones that also are known as Scope 3. So once the fuel goes down, all these emissions will probably remain the same. So from being about 2 or 3% of the total emissions of a vessel, once you start adding green fuel, this goes up exponentially. So some of the numbers we saw, not just from Maersk, but from other ship owners where we have done the same, is that Scope 3 is suddenly 30%, 40% of the total emissions of a vessel. Now, if you're a ship owner with a net zero ambition, suddenly you have to figure out what do we do with the rest, because either you decarbonize that or you have to pay for it somehow with certificates or abatement programs. So suddenly CO2 will have a real cost for you as a ship owner. So that was really the motivation that we figured out, and that's also why what you see here is just another evidence that Scope 3 is here to stay, and also about being data-driven. And by that, I would like to say thank you, Mikael, for me to explain a little bit about the Scope 3, and then I think should we jump into the panel? Unless anybody have any questions, then we have a few minutes for that. Any questions? Okay, thank you very much for the explanation. Oh, there is one. Yeah, please.
How do you account for the Scope 3 emissions? What data? How do you do it practically?
Yeah. So a very good example, how do we actually calculate Scope 3 emissions? And that is depending on if it's on a vessel or if it's on a product. But basically, there are two different ways of accounting for Scope 3 emissions. Typically, most of you on ship owner level or equipment manufacturers, if you're reporting your corporate emissions, you're using what is called a spend-based method. So using something very simple, taking the financial expenditure over a period of time, and then you multiply it with some emission factors, some averages, and then you deduct some kind of a inflation rate for that period of time. That will give you a number, and that's called the spend-based version. Then the other one, that's the more technical one, and that's also where it gets a bit tricky, and this is where AI and software as a service and so on is really going to help you out. But that is the activity-based one. That's the one looking into the materials itself. So if we look at the water bottle, what type of plastic is it made of? Where was the plastic developed or manufactured? What is the manufacturing process of the water bottle? Where in the world was that done? Because we need to account for the energy consumption of the machines that are adding the water and melting the plastic. Then we need to look into the logistics involved with transporting the bottles around the world. And this is not really something you need to overlook, because if you put the smaller the vehicle, the higher the emissions per kilo of transported goods. So this is also important. That's the logistical element. But then, more importantly, the recycling of the plastic. And this is where many vessels sometimes have a hard time explaining what happens to the bottles, right? Of course, they're probably landed and there is some kind of a traceability to a third party, but from there, nobody knows what happens. So it's really hard to account for. So that's the activity-based version. And if you have a more another product, that would be the steel, the energy that goes into it, and so on. Now, for you doing the spend-based versus the activity-based. Now, me and Mikael were riding together yesterday, and we were just like, so Rasmus, do you have any numbers on spend-based? If we do the water bottles on spend-based, like many other ship owners, and then compare it to this activity-based version, what is the difference between the emissions? And we were shocked. It was 60% higher if you use spend-based. So there's many of you with a lot of emissions out there that are much higher than what it should be, perhaps, or even lower. You don't know. There is a higher uncertainty, but 60% in difference is a big thing. So if you're working with a company which have green ambitions and want to lower their emissions, try and look into what you call the hotspots, where you have the highest emissions, and then looking at the methodology on how you're calculating, because you want to look at that data, you want to improve it where it makes sense. And this is where the activity-based, data-driven approach really is probably a good idea. And this is also what ties into the second initiative that IMPA, International Marine Purchasers Association, have started a couple of years ago. It's called IMEF, IMPA Maritime Environmental Footprint. And it's all about getting together, because now we saw the bottles, but the biggest question was, so how do we actually calculate it in a uniform way and share the data across the entire value chain? That was our next ambition. And this is where we came up with what we call the IMEF Initiative. And this is a lot of ship owners, a lot of OEMs, a lot of procurement platforms going together agreeing on how to calculate these emissions and how to share them across the value chain in a standardized format. So our goal is also for us today is not selling anything, it's more inspiring and say if you have a similar issue, not necessarily decarb, but something else, it is possible, and we will love to share on our experiences on how that could be done and how we can actually collaborate across the value chain. Thank you.